Welcome the chosen ones. Watch closely because no one is coming to save them this time. For years, you felt the weight of an entire community's gaze turned against you. A silent army cheering every jab, every whisper, every attempt to make you feel small. But here's a fact that might shock you. Studies show that over 80% of social bullying relies not on the bully's power, but on the crowd's complicity. In other words, the mob is the real muscle, and without it, even the loudest aggressor is just a tiny, desperate voice echoing in an empty hall. Imagine the irony. For years, they strutted like kings and queens, assuming their influence was absolute, only to discover that the audience, the entire community that fed their cruelty, has quietly exited stage left. No one applauds. No one covers for them. No one laughs at their jokes anymore. And while they scramble to understand why the world suddenly feels like quicksand beneath their feet, you're standing there untouched, observing the unraveling with that smug half-smile that says, "Oh, you thought I was alone." Humor sneaks in when you see them pacing like frantic actors, realizing the script was torn up months ago. The irony isn't lost on anyone. They spent so much energy orchestrating your discomfort, yet the universe, or maybe just human nature, has decided the final curtain falls on them, not you. And here's the part you'll want to hold on to. This isn't about revenge. It's about observation. It's about watching the facade collapse all by itself, leaving nothing but the raw, undeniable truth of who really matters. So buckle up, because what you're about to witness isn't a story of someone getting back at their bullies. It's a revelation. A moment where an entire community's allegiance shifts, leaving the aggressors exposed, isolated, and irrelevant, while you stand at the center of a quiet, unshakable power. And yes, you might even chuckle a little, as reality serves them exactly what they've been dishing out for years. Number one, they can't hide behind numbers anymore. They can't hide behind numbers anymore. For years, their strength wasn't real. It was borrowed. Every insult, every shove, every sneer was amplified because the crowd played along. Alone, they were small, awkward, and completely incapable of the domination they tried to project. The community wasn't just cheering. It was lending them armor, shielding them from consequences, and creating an illusion that they were untouchable. That's how they maintained the narrative that you were weak, that you were alone, and that their power was absolute. Their confidence was nothing but borrowed confidence, inflated by the presence of those who clapped, laughed, or simply didn't speak up. Now that the numbers have dissolved, all of that artificial strength evaporates. The walls built by collective fear and passive approval collapse. Without the crowd to protect them, every flaw, every insecurity, every desperate attempt to intimidate becomes glaringly obvious. The voice that once roared suddenly sounds hollow. The threats that once seemed dangerous are now empty, and the swagger that relied on the mob's energy vanishes. They are no longer the orchestrators of a show. They are just performers facing an empty theater, and for the first time the audience isn't participating. What's remarkable is how quickly the illusion unravels. They have spent years under the assumption that numbers equal power, that visibility equals influence, that people will keep supporting cruelty as long as it entertains them. But numbers without substance are nothing. The moment the community withdrew their silent consent, the bully's empire crumbled. What's left is raw exposure. There's no buffer, no padding, no distraction. Just them standing alone facing the consequences of relying on borrowed authority. This shift changes everything. Their confidence falters, their posture sags, and the energy that once made them untouchable is replaced with hesitation and uncertainty. And while they scramble to figure out how to regain control, they are confronted with the harsh truth. Their power was never theirs. It was an illusion sustained by others' compliance. Now stripped of the crowd, they have nothing but their own fragile ego staring back at them. That's why they are powerless now, and why no matter what they try, no one is stepping in to rebuild the myth for them. The strength they once flaunted was never real, and the collapse is permanent. Number two, the silence of the community is louder than their insults. The silence of the community is louder than their insults. It's not the quiet that speaks. It's the absence of support that hits the hardest. For years, the bully relied on the background noise, the laughter, the whispers, the nods of agreement, the subtle cues that anyone was backing their cruelty. That noise was the signal that their actions were acceptable, even admired. Every jab, every rumor, every act of intimidation was reinforced by the community's participation. Whether active or passive, the crowd's presence made them feel invincible, untouchable, like their cruelty was a performance that demanded applause. Now the applause is gone. The whispers have dried up. The laughter has vanished. And in its place is a weighty, unsettling emptiness. That silence isn't neutral. It's a statement. It's the loudest message they could ever receive without a single word. You are alone and no one is supporting you. It carries the power of truth, exposing the fragility of their supposed dominance. They learn to thrive on attention, but attention has abandoned them, leaving them exposed and unmasked. The energy that once fueled them has shifted entirely, not toward you but away from them. And that absence hits harder than any insult ever could. This silence is more than absence. It's judgment without confrontation. There's no need for the community to argue, fight, or intervene, because the withdrawal itself is punishment enough. They have become irrelevant in the eyes of those who once elevated them, and that realization eats away at their ego faster than any verbal defeat could. Every attempt to reclaim influence meets a void where support once existed, and the emptiness amplifies their desperation. The brilliance of this shift is that it doesn't require retaliation, strategy, or confrontation on your part. The collapse of their power is happening naturally, because the people they relied on to maintain it have decided to step away. The silence isn't passive. It's an invisible force pressing down on them with the weight of collective withdrawal. It exposes them, diminishes them, and rewires the social narrative that once protected their cruelty. In that emptiness, the bully finally experiences the reality they tried to impose on others for so long. They are small, they are unsupported, and they are powerless. The community's quiet rejection becomes their loudest defeat. Number 3, betrayal doesn't feel like justice. It feels like decay. Betrayal doesn't feel like justice. It feels like decay. It isn't sudden or dramatic. It's slow, relentless, and it eats away at the foundations of their confidence and ego. For years, they believed they were untouchable, that every insult, every smear, every push to humiliate you was backed by a network of people who would never let them fall. That belief was their safety net, the invisible shield that allowed cruelty to feel safe, even glamorous. Every action was calculated with the comfort of knowing someone somewhere had their back. That's what made their behavior so bold and their arrogance so unchecked. Now the very people they counted on have disappeared. The support they relied on, the nods, the whispered encouragement, the silent complicity, all of it has been withdrawn. It isn't the confrontation that kills them. It's the realization that the world they manipulated so carefully is crumbling beneath them. Their alliances weren't built on loyalty, but on convenience. And when that convenience expires, the loyalty vanishes too. What they thought was power now feels like emptiness, and the decay begins. Every interaction that once reinforced their sense of superiority now rings hollow. People no longer step in to amplify their voice or defend their actions. Every attempt to recreate the old environment fails, because the ecosystem that made their cruelty sustainable is gone. Their reputation, once bolstered by collective approval, now exposes them as fragile and desperate. It isn't that anyone is actively attacking them. It's that the absence of support leaves them vulnerable, and vulnerability is corrosive. What they're left with is an internal erosion. The confidence they carried into rooms, the swagger they used to intimidate, the sense of certainty in their dominance, all of it begins to rot from the inside. They are forced to confront themselves without the crutch of the community, and the decay is undeniable. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty comes back to them not as punishment, but as exposure. The people who once shielded them have turned away, leaving only the cold truth that they built everything on borrowed strength. This is a reckoning they can't spin, a collapse they can't prevent, and a humiliation that can't be softened. Betrayal by the very community they exploited doesn't just expose them, it decomposes the identity they constructed around fear and intimidation. The slow, unavoidable decay is a testament not to your actions, but to the unsustainable nature of cruelty, when it depends entirely on others to sustain it. Number 4, the crowd didn't just leave. They saw too much. The crowd didn't just leave. They saw too much. Bullying never survives on boredom alone. It survives because people believe in the story being told, because they are willing to overlook the cracks and inconsistencies in that blind participation. Every insult, every smear, every attempt to diminish you was validated by their actions of the crowd. Their cruelty thrived on the collective suspension of disbelief, on the willingness of others to pretend nothing was wrong, to laugh, to nod, to silently approve. But that suspension has ended. The mask that concealed their insecurities, their envy, their small-mindedness has fallen. People didn't just walk away. They opened their eyes and realized the truth. They saw the arrogance for what it was, the cowardice behind the swagger, the desperation behind the aggression. The carefully constructed illusion of power could no longer hold when the observers recognized the reality underneath. That recognition wasn't passive. It wasn't mere indifference. It was a conscious withdrawal, a refusal to be complicit in supporting someone whose actions and character no longer merited participation. The abuser is left facing the emptiness that follows. Without the audience, every word, every gesture, every attempt to assert dominance echoes back only at them. There is no applause to soften the impact, no nods to legitimize their presence, no whispers to amplify their authority. The people who once reinforced their cruelty have stepped back, leaving only reflection and exposure. That exposure is the most devastating blow because it confirms that their power was never theirs in the first place. It was borrowed, dependent on the crowd's willingness to ignore the truth. And now with the crowd gone, the truth is undeniable. Their reputation, their influence, their sense of control, all shrink to the size of a solitary figure pacing an empty room. The more they try to recreate the old dynamics, the more obvious their desperation becomes. The mask is off and everyone sees the person behind it, a figure who thrived not because of talent, intelligence, or real power, but because of the temporary complicity of others. What the crowd witnessed was never just cruelty. It was a reveal of character too ugly to sustain. And walking away is the ultimate statement. The abuser has been exposed. And the silence of those who left speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Number 5. They've been outed as entertainment, not leaders. They've been outed as entertainment, not leaders. For years, the community allowed them space to act out because their antics were funny, shocking, or dramatic. Every insult, every manipulation, every over-the-top display of power was met with chuckles, nods, or quiet admiration. People tolerated their behavior not because they respected it, but because it was entertaining. The cruelty was part of the act, a performance designed to keep attention focused on them. And for a long time it worked. They mistook the applause, the whispers, and the gasps of astonishment for genuine influence, believing that attention equals authority. The problem is, attention is not respect. Amusement is not loyalty. Once the joke stopped landing, once the theatrics became repetitive or mean-spirited, the illusion shattered. People started seeing the cracks, the insecurity behind the bravado, the selfishness behind the confidence, the fear behind the aggression. What they thought was leadership, control over opinions, admiration, influence, was only a mask hiding their reliance on others' willingness to tolerate the performance. They were never guiding anyone. They were performing for anyone willing to watch. Now the community has stopped laughing. They stopped applauding. They stopped pretending that this figure of cruelty had authority or vision. Without the crowd feeding the illusion, the truth is impossible to ignore. They are no longer the person everyone listened to or feared. They are a caricature of themselves, a reminder of wasted energy and misplaced attention. Their power was never real. It was an act, a circus where the audience eventually realized the ringmaster had nothing to offer beyond spectacle. The revelation is devastating to them because it isn't just social, it's existential. Everything they believed about themselves, their importance and their influence collapses. They invested years in a persona built on entertainment, mistaking laughter for legitimacy, and now the audience has walked away. What remains is exposure. A figure alone in the spotlight they once commanded, reduced from someone people respected in their eyes to someone people tolerated for amusement. The cruel irony is brutal. They spent all their energy trying to lead, only to find out the only thing they ever mastered was the performance of cruelty itself. Number 6. They're living in an empty theater. They're living in an empty theater. Every insult, every rumor, every attempt to humiliate you was designed as a performance. They rehearsed their lines, perfected their timing, and relied on the reactions of others to fuel their sense of importance. Every laugh, every gasp, every whisper of approval reinforced the illusion that they were untouchable, that their presence demanded attention. For years, the audience was real, tangible, and responsive, and they used that response as proof of their dominance. The energy of the crowd was the wind beneath their wings, convincing them that cruelty equaled influence. Now the theater is empty. The applause has stopped. The whispers have faded. No one leans in to react. No one mirrors their gestures. No one validates their performance. The lights remain on, but the seats are vacant, and the absence of an audience exposes everything they tried to hide. The swagger, the bravado, the carefully orchestrated intimidation. All of it collapses when there's no one to witness it. The performance that once gave them life now only illuminates their own desperation and emptiness. Performing to an empty room is a kind of humiliation that words can't soften. It isn't just social embarrassment. It's the stark realization that their influence was never organic, never earned and never deserved. It was a show sustained by others' attention. And without that attention, the act is meaningless. The persona they built, the fear they inspired, the power they claimed, all of it was dependent on spectators who now refused to engage. Their realization hits slowly at first, then like a spotlight scorching every pretense. They have nothing left but themselves, and themselves are inadequate for the role they imagined. The psychological impact is devastating. Every habit, every tactic, every ounce of energy spent manipulating the crowd suddenly feels wasted. The theater, once their stage of dominance, has become a chamber of exposure. Alone on a stage built for thousands, the realization is unavoidable. The illusion is gone. The mask is off, and the audience, the real measure of their so-called power, has disappeared. The emptiness of the seats echoes louder than any insult ever could. And in that echo they face the brutal truth. Their reign was never real, and now without the crowd it never will be. Number 7. The abuser is now the isolated one. The abuser is now the isolated one. For years they thrived by making you feel like the outsider, like someone who didn't belong. Every rumor, every exclusion, every subtle act of cruelty was calculated to ensure you carried the weight of loneliness while they moved through the room surrounded by allies, supporters, or even silent witnesses too afraid to intervene. They turned isolation into a weapon, assuming that if you were alone they were untouchable. That assumption fueled their arrogance, making them believe that social dominance could protect them indefinitely. Now the tables have turned. The same hallways, the same gatherings, the same environments where they once strutted with confidence are no longer filled with nods or subtle reinforcement. They walk into rooms and feel the very tension, suspicion, and awkwardness they once inflicted on you. People keep their distance, hesitate before engaging, and choose not to include them in conversations. The energy they once commanded, the social flow they manipulated, has evaporated. Every glance, every silence, every small act of avoidance is a mirror reflecting the isolation they once imposed on others. What makes this shift especially powerful is how immediate and undeniable it is. They can try to assert dominance, make jokes, or recreate old dynamics, but the responses are no longer validating. Every attempt to reinsert themselves into social relevance meets walls of polite indifference or subtle rejection. The aura of untouchability they relied on disappears because it was never built on merit. It was always built on fear, manipulation, and the complicity of others. Without that foundation, their isolation isn't accidental. It's a consequence of the very tactics they use to control others. Being alone now is not just about physical distance. It's about social invisibility and irrelevance. The discomfort, the hesitancy, the subtle avoidance, all of it mirrors the effect they once inflicted on you, magnified by the psychological twist that the roles have reversed. They are forced to confront the fragility of their ego without the protective shield of a crowd. The tables have turned completely. The predator of social spaces now experiences the sting of the very isolation they weaponized. And it is a slow, inescapable reckoning that no amount of posturing can undo. Number 8. The fear of being associated with them is greater than the fear of you. The fear of being associated with them is greater than the fear of you. For years, people tolerated their behavior because staying close carried no real consequence. Siding with them was easy, even profitable socially. Their cruelty and manipulation went unchecked because the community either found it convenient or feared what might happen if they didn't participate. And for a long time that made them feel untouchable. Now everything has changed. The same actions that once seemed harmless or entertaining have transformed into liabilities. Their name has become toxic currency, something people actively avoid rather than embrace. The crowd no longer sees the abuser as a figure of influence or a force to fear. They see them as a problem, a risk, a reputation sinkhole. Any attempt to defend or ally with them carries immediate social consequences. People are no longer willing to lend credibility, validate their behavior, or even appear in their corner. This shift completely undermines the foundation of their so-called power. Authority built on fear and borrowed support is fragile. But when the cost of association rises, fragility becomes collapse. The abuser can still try to intimidate, manipulate, or assert control. But now the very presence of their name repels potential allies. The community's silence and withdrawal are strategic. They are a protective measure against being dragged into someone else's social toxicity. What's striking is the reversal of dynamics. For so long you were the one who bore the burden of social scrutiny, whispers, and judgment. Now they're exposed to it fully without shields or excuses. People don't need to confront them directly. Avoidance alone speaks volumes. Their reputation, once inflated by passive approval and tolerance, now isolates them in a way that fear of you never could. The consequence is clear. Influence that depends on others' willingness to align isn't real power. When association becomes a liability, isolation is inevitable, and the abuser is left facing the weight of their actions without the safety net they once relied on. The ultimate irony is brutal. The fear they inspired is gone, replaced by the fear they now generate in others, not because of what they can do, but because being linked to them is now a risk. And that risk exposes the emptiness of their former dominance. Number 9, without the mob, they can't justify their cruelty. Without the mob, they can't justify their cruelty. Bullying isn't just about what one person does. It's about what others allow, tolerate, or silently support. Every insult, every rumor, every small act of aggression was amplified by the presence of witnesses who nodded, laughed, or looked away. The crowd didn't just watch, they legitimized it. Their silence and participation created the illusion that the behavior was acceptable, even impressive. The bullies' confidence and sense of dominance were never entirely their own. They were borrowed from the energy and consent of others. Now that energy is gone, the same words and gestures that once commanded attention now float in empty space. Every insult ricochets back, exposing desperation instead of authority. Without witnesses to normalize the cruelty, the acts become hollow, meaningless, and even embarrassing. The community no longer validates the behavior, and the abuser is forced to confront the reality that what they once called power was entirely performative. The more they push, the more obvious it becomes that their dominance depended on others' complicity, and without it they are weak, awkward, and transparent. The psychological impact is crushing. Every attempt to assert control is met with silence, indifference, or subtle avoidance. They no longer have the invisible safety net of social compliance. There's no one to nod, to whisper encouragement, or to amplify their influence. The acts that once made them feel untouchable now only highlight their reliance on others for legitimacy. Their cruelty, once shielded by the crowd, now stands exposed, and exposure without validation is disarming. This shift also rewires perception in the community. People who once ignored or tolerated their behavior now see the desperation and fragility beneath the aggression. The abuser is no longer imposing fear or dominance. They are broadcasting insecurity and isolation. Attempts to regain attention or assert influence fall flat because the social structure that supported them has collapsed. Every act of cruelty that ricochets back reinforces a new truth. Without others to justify it, cruelty loses all power. What they relied on for validation becomes the mirror reflecting their own emptiness, leaving them vulnerable, exposed, and powerless. Number 10. Their legacy is stamped with cowardice. Their legacy is stamped with cowardice. For years they believed they were building influence, authority, and fear. Every insult, every manipulation, every attempt to dominate was carefully crafted to leave a mark on the world, to make sure people remembered them. They thought their power would be permanent, that the fear they inspired would outlast them, and that the alliances they cultivated would hold forever. But power built on cruelty and dependency on others, participation is never stable. Communities remember actions, yes, but they also remember choices, and especially who was abandoned when the pressure shifted. When the crowd disappears, the truth of their character becomes impossible to hide. The people who once tolerated, encouraged, or silently supported them see clearly now. Those alliances vanish in an instant because they were never grounded in respect or loyalty. They were transactional, convenient, and ultimately meaningless. What remains is not fear, not influence, not admiration. It's shame. Their reign is measured not by how long they dominated, but by how quickly they were exposed, when their support network evaporated. People don't recall the power they thought they had. They recall the fragility, the desperation, and the abandonment. The cruelty that once seemed formidable now reads as weakness. Every act designed to impress or intimidate becomes a reminder of dependency. Their strength was never real. It was borrowed. The very same people they thought were under their control, whose silence and approval made them feel untouchable, are the ones who walk away first, leaving them stranded in isolation. That abandonment defines their legacy far more than any insults or schemes ever could. The irony is relentless. They spent years trying to appear strong, calculated, and untouchable. And yet history, both personal and social, remembers them differently. Communities will tell stories not of fear, but of how quickly they fell apart when the crowd withdrew. The mark they leave behind is not one of dominance or respect, but of cowardice and failed intimidation. Their legacy is permanent in its revelation. Power based on cruelty, fear, and borrowed influence crumbles without witnesses. And what is left for others to remember is a cautionary tale about fragility, dependency, and the ultimate cost of living a life built on the backs of others. Number 11. You've outlasted the groupthink cycle. You've outlasted the groupthink cycle. Mobs and social pressures are not permanent. They have a lifespan, a tipping point, where the energy that sustains them dissipates. For so long, the collective cruelty, the synchronized whispers, the nods of agreement and participation created the illusion that their dominance was unstoppable. They thrived in that cycle, confident that the group's consensus was eternal, that the momentum of conformity would never break. But groupthink, like any temporary force, eventually erodes, opinions shift, attention wanes, and the patterns of collective behavior collapse once the novelty of cruelty fades, or when people quietly decide they no longer want to participate in sustaining someone else's power. You endured the cycle. You carried the weight, weathered the attacks, and maintained your integrity despite the orchestrated pressure. While they relied on conformity, you relied on persistence and inner stability. And as the mob's energy dwindled, you witnessed it firsthand, the gradual unraveling of their influence, the fading of their so-called authority, the silence that replaced applause. That moment of collapse doesn't just mark their failure. It marks your endurance. Your survival isn't passive. It is active proof that their power was never real, that it depended entirely on participation, and that when the cycle expired, you emerged intact while their borrowed dominance crumbled. There's a deeper truth in surviving the groupthink cycle. It demonstrates your resilience against both external pressure and internal doubt. Mobs thrive on uncertainty, hesitation, and fear. They manipulate those vulnerabilities to maintain control. By outlasting them, you have proven that your strength is not conditional on popularity, fear, or validation. It is intrinsic, unwavering, and self-sustaining. The collective illusion of their power is exposed as temporary, fragile, and superficial, while your endurance reflects a strength they cannot manufacture or borrow. Witnessing the collapse of their collective illusion is more than vindication. It is a revelation. It shows that influence built on conformity and participation has limits, that those who thrive on orchestrated cruelty are temporary, and that those who endure without compromise hold real lasting power. Your survival stands as evidence that nothing constructed on borrowed approval can withstand the test of time, and that true strength exists independent of the fleeting tides of groupthink. Number 12. Their reputation became the cautionary tale. Their reputation became the cautionary tale. For years they worked hard to construct an image of dominance, control, and influence, projecting strength through cruelty and manipulation. Every insult, every rumor, every subtle act of intimidation was a brick in the wall of their supposed legacy. They believed people would remember them for fear they inspired, for the way they could bend social situations to their will. But power built on the misfortune of others is fragile, and the willingness of others to participate in sustaining it. Now the perception has shifted. Parents, co-workers, neighbors, all those who once observed from the sidelines aren't talking about you anymore. They're talking about the abuser. Conversations revolve around their arrogance, their cruelty, their desperate attempts to maintain relevance, and how quickly the crowd abandoned them when it no longer served its own comfort or amusement. The very people who once elevated or tolerated them now see the truth. The identity they built on the destruction of others is hollow. They are no longer feared, admired, or even tolerated. They are a living warning. The transformation is stark and undeniable. Where they once appeared untouchable, they are now vulnerable. Where they once inspired compliance or admiration, they now inspire caution and avoidance. Every attempt to reclaim the aura of power only reinforces the narrative of instability and dependence on others' complicity. Their social identity has inverted from predator to example of failure, from influencer to object lesson. People remember not what they commanded, but what they lost and how quickly the illusion fell apart. This shift has an almost poetic justice to it. The tools they use to control and intimidate have become the markers of their downfall. Their legacy isn't a record of strength or fear. It's an unmistakable cautionary tale. Building your sense of self on the destruction, humiliation, or manipulation of others is unsustainable. Communities remember patterns of behavior more vividly than temporary victories. And in this case, the pattern is unmistakable. The abuser now exists in conversations as a warning, proof that cruelty only works when others are willing to participate, and that when that participation ends, exposure, shame, and irrelevance follow inevitably. Their reputation has become a mirror for anyone who witnessed their rise, a reflection of what happens when identity is built on the suffering of others rather than integrity. Number 13. The abuser now understands loneliness without relief. The abuser now understands loneliness without relief. For so long they thrived on the isolation they forced upon others, creating a narrative that you were weak, vulnerable, and alone. Every whispered insult, every exclusion, every subtle manipulation was designed to make you feel isolated while they moved through the world surrounded by allies, supporters, or silent witnesses who reinforced their power. They assumed that loneliness was a tool they could wield at will, a weapon they could aim at anyone unfortunate enough to be in their path. What they never anticipated was the reversal. The same community that once enabled their cruelty has pulled away, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions in complete solitude. Their name, once amplified by the attention and participation of others, now echoes only against empty walls. The connections they counted on to maintain the illusion of influence and relevance have vanished. The very networks they relied upon for validation have dissolved, leaving them to confront the stark reality of isolation. This loneliness is different from the casual solitude they assumed others experienced. It is uncompromising, unrelenting, and permanent in its weight. There is no audience to soften the impact, no whispered approvals to cushion the blow. Every attempt to claim influence or recognition is met with indifference or avoidance. The energy that once sustained them, borrowed from the complicity of others, has evaporated. The social machinery they depended on is gone, and with it any temporary relief their cruelty might have once provided. The irony is undeniable. They believed that isolation was a punishment they could deliver, a reflection of weakness in others. Yet they now endure it themselves with no escape. There is no reprieve, no safety net, no chance to manipulate or intimidate their way out. The community's withdrawal is absolute, because cruelty loses its grip when the people who sustained it choose disengagement. In this permanent state of solitude, the abuser is forced to confront the emptiness they once imposed on others, a loneliness that is not temporary, not negotiable, and not softened by the presence of anyone else. The lesson is clear and inescapable. The isolation they inflicted has returned, mirrored and magnified, and for the first time they understand what it truly feels like to be utterly alone. Number 14. The final blow is that you didn't need to lift a finger. The final blow is that you didn't need to lift a finger. For years they believed their power depended on your weakness, that your efforts, your patience, and your struggles would keep them secure. They imagined a world where their cruelty demanded action from you, where every defense, every response, every attempt to survive fed into their sense of control. They built their dominance on the idea that you would always be reactive, always carrying the weight of their attacks, always invested in proving yourself. Now none of that mattered. Their downfall didn't come from your plotting, your retaliation, or any calculated move on your part. It came from the natural implosion of their own making. The community, long complicit in sustaining their cruelty, gradually withdrew, not because of pressure, not because of strategy, but because the environment that enabled cruelty eventually collapses under its own weight. People stop participating. Attention wanes and the carefully constructed illusion of authority and invincibility crumbles. They are left exposed, isolated, and powerless, forced to confront the consequences of a system they built around manipulation and fear. The devastating reality for them is that their power was never yours to dismantle. It was inherently unsustainable. They relied on borrowed strength, on complicity, on the temporary willingness of others to tolerate or support their behavior. When that support evaporated, there was no scaffolding left to hold them up. Every attempt to maintain dominance now only highlights their fragility. Their strategies, their threats, and their attempts at intimidation fail to resonate, because the very foundation of their influence, the crowd, the network, the audience, is gone. This is what makes the moment so powerful for you. Their collapse is entirely self-inflicted. You did not orchestrate it. You did not fight for it. And you did not need to intervene. The universe, human nature, or the simple inevitability of truth delivered the outcome. And you are left standing untouched and undeniable. They see it perhaps with disbelief, perhaps with rage, that the very environment they controlled no longer exists to prop them up. Their undoing is permanent, public and utterly inevitable, and it didn't require you to lift a finger. The irony is ruthless. All along, their own wickedness was the architect of their defeat, and the victory for you was effortless, complete, and absolute. The story is clear. The tide has turned, and the world has quietly corrected itself. Every insult, every manipulation, every attempt to make you feel small has lost its power. Not because of confrontation, not because of revenge, but because the foundation that sustained it has collapsed. The community that once cheered for cruelty has withdrawn, leaving the abuser exposed, isolated, and irrelevant. Their borrowed confidence is gone. Their influence evaporated, and their reputation has become a cautionary tale, a testament to the fragility of power built on fear and complicity. You didn't need to fight or orchestrate their downfall. You survived, endured, and maintained your integrity while their unsustainable behavior imploded on its own. Their attempts to dominate, intimidate, and isolate you now ricochet back, exposing desperation instead of control. The masks have fallen. The empty theaters remain, and the crowd no longer feeds their illusions. The very isolation they once inflicted on you has returned tenfold, permanent and undeniable. What remains is your strength, quiet but absolute. You outlasted the groupthink, survived the cycles of cruelty, and emerged standing while their borrowed authority crumbled. Their downfall is proof that cruelty and manipulation are temporary, while patience, endurance, and integrity are permanent. You are no longer the target. They are the lesson, the warning, and the example of what happens when someone builds their identity on tearing others down. This is more than victory. It's revelation. It's proof that real power doesn't need validation, that endurance outlasts intimidation, and that the universe has a way of exposing the unsustainable. They are defeated not by force but by truth, exposure, and the natural consequences of their own actions. And you, the chosen one, remain untouchable, unshaken, and undeniable. Stand tall because your survival, your resilience, and your unwavering presence are living proof that the people who tried to diminish you were never truly powerful. Their downfall is complete, and your rise is permanent. You didn't need to lift a finger. The world did the work for you. It's time to let everyone witness it. Your endurance is your legacy. Your strength is your proof. And your life now tells a story they can never erase. If you want to be part of this journey and witness more truths like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Don't miss a single revelation. Like this video if you felt the power of what just unfolded. Comment below and share your thoughts or experiences, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Your support helps spread the truth and ensures that the energy of endurance and strength reaches everyone who needs it. Let's rise above together. Your voice matters and your presence counts.